So I think we a little bit run behind the time. So maybe I'll move to the next one, and then we can have more time at the end of the session. So the next one will be Benjamin Tay from Singapore. His presentation will be on the sort of transnational approach to public sphere. His case from the transnational public sphere and public action in Singapore on the experience of Singaporean case. So please.
Hi everyone. Okay. Hi everyone. Thank you very much to the organizers for having us here. This is the second time I'm in Bangkok this year, and it's I think this is a really good platform for a local NGO like ours, that's working in Singapore most of the time, to actually find opportunities to collaborate and to actually hear what our regional friends are doing. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. So today's, I think the thing that ties our presentations together so far is that democracy seems to be a veil that we all kind of hide behind. We state that we are democratic, but in actual fact, our practices are not. Yeah, and I think that has been really the challenge which we have faced as well. In our own journey in advocacy against transboundary haze in Singapore. So I'm mindful that I only have 12 minutes, so I'll give you guys a broad overview from the perspective of PM Haze, People's Movement to Stop Haze. And if you have any further questions, I'll be happy to address them either after the session or even during the breaks. So historically, haze has been publicly around since 1961, right? So we're in the 57th year of the anniversary of haze, right? In Singapore at least, right? And I'm sure it's been around in the region for much longer than that. And the very first account in the media was when a plane actually a plane that was bound for KL actually overshot KL and flew onto Singapore in 1961. 1997 really was the first time when I think the haze caught a lot of international media attention. There was a state of emergency that was actually declared in Sarawak in Malaysia at the time, and I think that really sparked off kind of international interest in the issue. And eventually in 2013, haze hit Singapore quite badly. So we recorded our highest pollutant standards index reading of 401 in that year. And then subsequently in 2015, we had one of the longest bouts of haze, which probably lasted about 3 months. So I think the presentation I'm giving today will focus a little bit on the causes, the impacts, and I would like to put a little bit more time on the solutions that we've come up with so far and we are working towards. So I think one of the major issues, or one of the major causes of haze is the clearance of tropical peatlands, especially in areas like Sumatra, which affect the air quality, of course locally in Sumatra, as well as the winds bringing it over to Singapore. And that's one of the major problems of haze, and haze is often seen as, it's pollution, but in fact it's not, because I think the underlying issues of haze are issues of social justice, are issues of exploitation of communities in the area, are issues of land and environmental exploitation as well. And I think of recent we've been hearing a lot about climate change, but there is very little link to, or very little links that people are making between haze and climate change. We're not looking at the potential effect of if we do not attack this issue head on from now on. Peatlands are huge carbon sinks, so they hold a lot of carbon. They store a lot of carbon. once you start clearing the peatlands, the rate of carbon emission increases by a lot. And as we saw from the lesson we learned for 2015, right, is that the whole period of haze in 2015, the burning that happened actually equal to the entire year of carbon emission of Germany, or a country like Germany, just in that small period of time. So I think there is an imperative, and I do believe that our neighbor governments have actually played a very strong role in trying to come up with national initiatives. I think President Jokowi, since taking power, has actually managed to put in some moratoriums as well as set up national agencies to address the peatland issue. But of course, Indonesia having 17,000 islands is not a very easy issue to tackle, especially at the local or provincial levels. And all this really is mainly for what we consume in our daily lives, right? Palm oil and paper. I think places like Riau, for example, in the southern part of Sumatra, paper plantations are a huge industry that are also owned by large conglomerates, family-owned conglomerates in Indonesia. So therein lies the challenge of how do we address the problem where the politics of patronage and all that are so finely intertwined. So, and of course the impacts, I'm sure most of you would probably know, is I think in mainland Southeast Asia as well, we do see a lot of pollution from burning. The health impacts of haze, definitely on individual respiratory health, impacts on community. I picked that picture because I thought it was very interesting, the picture of the man, the half-naked man. And if you can see in the background, there's actually a small little line of what seems to be cloud or water. Right? So that at the back there is actually a helicopter that is water bombing peatland area that is burning. And this really shows that huge contrast between what the community or what individuals in the community can do versus what actions that people with more resources can do. Like for example, companies, right, that can do water bombing with helicopters and things like that. So the impacts on local communities are really very real and very serious. Communities like migrant worker communities in Singapore who work outdoors all the time are also subject to some of these problems, as well as farmers in our region that also do not have the luxury of hiding out in air-conditioned rooms with air purifiers. And of course the environmental impacts on both plant and animal diversity in the region. So on to solutions. I think to trace some of the solutions that are probably a direct result of the haze episodes in Singapore. So like I mentioned, I think back in 2013, it was one of the worst haze periods in Singapore, where PSI hit about 400. That's when the government decided that, okay, we need to do something, if not the people are going to say that we're not doing anything about it, right? So there came gave birth to the THPA, which is the Trans-Boundary Haze Pollution Act. I think there are a lot of problems with this particular act. I won't go into too much detail, but I think there are problems with transparency over why certain companies were selected and certain companies were not selected in terms of the legislation. There was a lot of there was a lack of transparency in terms of the investigation process as well, as to how these companies were found to be guilty of these crimes, for example, of causing haze. And the fact that all 6 companies, eventually 5 of them, I think one of the charges were dropped, but all 6 companies were actually related third-party suppliers to Asia Pulp and Paper, which is a company that's owned by a large family-owned conglomerate in Indonesia. So that was a result of 2013. 2015, when the haze, when we were in the thick of the haze, I think the haze period was quite prolonged. So I think in the middle of it, the government decided to work through one of our state-owned supermarket chains to pull pulp and paper products that were owned by Asia Pulp and Paper, again, same company, off the shelves of this national supermarket. So that's I think the thing I'm trying to highlight here is that state action has been the focus of a lot of this, a lot of the periods of haze. And I think the state wants to be seen as the person who can deliver that solution to the people in that sense. So that goes how we actually frame our activism, and I thought that this idea of pragmatic resistance frames it quite well. So what we've done in our advocacy work is that we actually work with the local media in Singapore, with journalists that we have a relationship with, and writing opinion articles and things like that, to try to push public opinion a little bit more and to try to give ourselves a little bit more space in the public sphere. So one of the very first things we did was how we actually were advocating for the transparency of air pollution data in Singapore. So to show 1 hour PSI figures, to give people a more accurate picture of the pollution that we were facing. Because previously they were giving 24-hour averages, which is probably not very useful, especially when we're talking about the rights of workers that were working outdoors, or even people who had to live or in conditions that were not in a close kind of condition. Another thing that we worked on is really a piece on how we were trying to promote the use of sustainable palm oil products in Singapore. So our very first breakthrough with that publicly was after closed-door discussions with our national supermarket chain. They were actually quite unwilling to reveal the fact that they were actually already using sustainable palm oil because of reasons of business competitiveness, and these were the reasons that they cited, right? Business competitiveness and other political reasons. So we, in response to one of the annual reports, we actually wrote an opinion piece forcing the supermarket chain to actually reveal the fact that they were using sustainable palm oil. And I think that was really a breakthrough in terms of how companies saw that as a sign where that, if government-owned entities were already using this sustainable palm oil, then perhaps we can start doing that as well. So if you trace the use of sustainable palm oil products in Singapore, I think from 2016 to 2017, there have been quite a big rise in terms of the use of sustainable palm oil products, which I think is a good thing. It's not all attributed to us. WWF in Singapore also has done very good advocacy work with larger businesses. I think we also employ a ground-up approach where we work with our volunteer community to actually encourage companies to actually take on the use of sustainable palm oil, as shown in this case. So these are some of the positive outcomes. We've actually managed to convert both small and large kind of F&B enterprises to convert to sustainable palm oil, and right now there are roughly about maybe 5 or 6 suppliers in the Singapore market that can actually produce and supply sustainable palm oil, as opposed to 2015 where I think there was only one supplier at the time and one F&B business that was actually using sustainable palm oil. I think one thing we try to do is that we try to connect the dots. I was talking to Assistant Professor Japrit just now, and we were saying how Singaporeans we all live in a very urban environment, so we don't really understand rural development issues. So through our ground projects in Malaysia, Indonesia, we try to bring people closer to the ground. So one of the things we did was we did a journalist visit to Sungai Tohor in Riau. It's an island called Pulau Terbitini. Sungai Tohor is located on an island called Pulau Terbitini. And basically we did some environmental conservation and peatland restoration work there. And we got the journalists to write up pieces in the newspapers and in Singapore after that trip in 2017. And it is still ongoing. We're currently working on a community empowerment project on haze and fire prevention in that area. So hopefully that will bring Singaporeans closer, or people in Singapore closer to the haze issue. So these are the two areas that we've had projects in so far. The Selangor Peace Swan Forest, that is actually 50,000 hectares of protected national state forest. And Tepi Tinggi Island, Pulau Tepi Tinggi, it's actually sitting on it, and the entire island is actually made out of peat. So the threat is really quite big in terms of the environmental threat, especially when El Nino is supposed to come next year. I think the dry spell might actually increase the chances of fires and haze there. So the last thing that I want to talk about is the next thing that we want to work on is responsible finance. So how do we really the crux of the problem in Singapore is not sustainable palm oil. I'll be very honest, because less than 1% of the total amount of palm oil used in the world Singapore uses less than 1% of the entire amount of palm oil used in the entire world. So even if we were to convert the entire Singapore to sustainable palm oil, it's not really going to make a dent in the system. It might spark other countries to be motivated to change, but that is something that we can't really control. But what we can control is the fact that we are banking haze. So out of this, from this research by Climate Reaction Research in 2017, you can see that the Singapore banks in yellow are actually one of the major, Singapore and Malaysia banks actually are one of the major lenders to the palm oil industry. We decided to scope it to the palm oil industry because that's what we were familiar with, because the pulp and paper industry has a very large role to play in terms of transboundary haze as well. Singapore is also the home to a lot of palm oil majors. Wilmar, Olam, Golden Agri, these are just a few of the large names that have their headquarters located in Singapore and are also listed on the Singapore Exchange. So there is a very big potential in terms of how we can implement sustainable or good ESG policies to encourage these companies to do better. So far, our key recommendations, we're still working out the methodology, as well as we've done the literature review already. We're still working out the methodology, as well as some of the tightening up some of the case studies. But basically, some of our recommendations so far is that we need a time-bound plan for existing palm oil clients, so the palm oil clients for banks to become sustainable. We need to also encourage banks to support rural development via smallholder empowerment. And the last part is actually, I think, quite important, is to join international initiatives like RSPO. So RSPO is a roundtable on sustainable palm oil. And there is a lot of potential there because banks can actually join RSPO as a member, and there's actually a grievance process that they can actually activate. So if they find that one of their clients are flouting any of the rules, they can actually, there's a grievance process that they can activate independent investigation that will be commissioned by RSPO on any of these plantation companies. And a case that has happened was with Noble Plantations in Papua, which is a client of HSBC. HSBC didn't launch it through an official grievance process, but because of grassroots pressure, HSBC actually contacted RSPO to find out what can actually be done, and RSPO actually launched. They suspended the company and they actually launched an independent investigation into the practices that were going on. Apart from that, the Association of Banks in Singapore actually has a very good guideline. They actually came out with a haze toolkit, especially targeted at Singapore banks. But it's not mandated, so it's not be adopted by any of our banks. But these are all very good recommendations that possibly can be adopted by the financial industry in Singapore. So I think this is something that we're working on. We're trying to compare across the guidelines and seeing what are the areas of improvement that are needed, or what are the areas that are already in place that are very good. Okay, I'm happy to take questions after this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Benjamin. So if you have questions, maybe we can have the Q&A after this. So the last but not least, presentation by Mon Palatino. He's the regional editor of the Global Voices Southeast Asia, and his presentation entitled Trends, Opportunities and Challenges of the Environmental Reporting in Southeast Asia, whose voice is heard. So please.
Good morning everyone. Magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat. So I will be highlighting the situation in the Philippines, and then later I will try to connect these issues to what's affecting other countries in Southeast Asia with respect to environmental reporting, free speech protection, and defense of rights of environmental groups. So, overview of the Philippine situation. So, Global Witness, an NGO, identified the Philippines as the second deadliest country in the world for environmental defenders. I think the deadliest country is in Latin American country. So, you have the Philippines situation where in the past 2 years, we gained global headlines because of the notorious war on drugs. But the situation for environmental defenders is also very deeply troubling. And then we add this to another distinction for the Philippines, one of the deadliest countries in the world for journalists. So, since President Duterte assumed power in 2016, 12 journalists have been killed. So, we have no censorship board in the Philippines. There's no filtering of content. No Prime Minister is suing a blogger. But we have criminal libel laws used to harass journalists. And then the cybercrime law has a cyber libel provision, which is also being used to intimidate critics of the government. In the past 2 weeks, there was an issue of the government filing tax charges against an online news website, Rappler, which is also a critic, which is also providing critical coverage of the government's controversial programs. Also, the President has been threatening TV stations of canceling their licenses if they continue to be critical of the government. So, who are the victims of the killings? As listed by the Global Witness and also monitoring of civil society groups. You have first Lumad, or indigenous peoples from Mindanao, resisting the entry of mining, and a new phenomenon, the entry of plantation companies, specifically palm oil plantation companies. So I'll discuss that later. So Lumad is the collective term for indigenous peoples in Mindanao. Duterte is from Mindanao. So that's why his victory was phenomenal, because he's the first from Mindanao to become president. It's like someone from South Thailand becoming president from a Muslim-dominated region. So, activists opposing large dam projects. We have several dam projects across the country. New dam projects which are displacing indigenous peoples. And activists are targeted because of their opposition to these dam projects. You have peasant groups, advocates, being killed because of their support for land reform, especially in areas controlled by big landlords, family-owned estates. And then you have local leaders, local politicians exposing their fellow politicians in the logging operations. And we expect this to become worse next year because there will be midterm elections in the Philippines in May 2019. And you have Catholic priests. The Philippines, aside from East Timor, is the only Catholic-dominated country in Southeast Asia. You have an influential institution, the Catholic Church, and in our modern history, 2 presidents have been ousted from power. And there was support from the Catholic Church in mobilizing the people. So you have Catholic priests, specifically in North Luzon and Central Luzon, being killed because of their leadership in the anti-mining advocacy. So that's the context of the surge in violence. So Duterte is known around the world for his war on drugs, but he is waging 3 wars. The war on drugs, which has already killed, according to the police, 5,000 drug suspects, but according to human rights groups, 20,000 drug suspects. That's the first war. Then you have the war on terror in South Philippines, which is led to the destruction of Marawi City. And then you have the all-out war against communist rebels. So the all-out war against communist rebels, the main victims here are farmers accused of sympathizing with communist rebels, and also indigenous peoples resisting the entry of mining companies. And then you have here, Duterte offering Mindanao as an alternative to Malaysia and Indonesia for palm oil. So you have here a situation where the Mindanao, food basket of the Philippines, lagging plantation areas now being offered for palm oil companies. Duterte himself is offering this to investors. And because of this, indigenous peoples are being displaced from their ancestral domains. And then, intensified mining. We blame the Mining Act of 1995. 2 decades of this law, and it led to deforestation, destruction of watersheds, and mining disasters in the Philippines. So, the Mining Act of 1995 is a very good law if you are a foreigner, because you have tax privileges and other incentives from the government. So, you have build projects. So many loans provided by China to Duterte. I should provide some context here. The previous president was really critical to China's behavior in the South China Sea. That's why we renamed South China Sea into West Philippine Sea. And then when Duterte became president, he changed that policy, and now he's close friend with China, silent over the building of so many infrastructure in the West Philippine Sea. Perhaps in exchange of that, so many Chinese loans are being provided to the Philippines, which are financing these dams and other infrastructure projects. And aside from Chinese money, you have investors putting in money for reclamation, the Manila Bay Reclamation Project, which is being also opposed by environmentalists. Also, other supposedly disaster preparation projects, but in reality, it's really harming the environment. So, connecting the situation in the Philippines to what's happening in Southeast Asia, you have the problem of impunity, killing of environmentalists with no prosecution, conviction. It only leads to the worsening of impunity. So you have the killing of foresters, forest guards, anti-mining advocates with no conviction. And then criminalizing citizen media documentation of environment destruction. Best example here is in Vietnam. There was a fish kill in central Vietnam, and it triggered a lot of protests, and the citizen journalists who documented that protest eventually were charged by the state and were given long prison terms. No? So it's not just in Vietnam, but also in many communities where citizen media, in the absence of mainstream media, are the only ones reporting the activities of groups opposing destructive projects. And then you have here the violent suppression of grassroots resistance, from filing of cases, arresting activists, drafting of laws that will criminalize dissent. And then development aggression renamed as environment protection. So again, I'll go back to the Philippines. Perhaps you know about Boracay Island. It was closed for several months to clean the environment. But the president, in one of his statements, admitted that he was trying to invite Chinese investors to build casinos in Boracay Island. So you have here development aggression projects being renamed as for environment protection, and then use of repressive laws to silence dissent. So, and then fake news legislation is the trend in many countries in Southeast Asia. If an advocacy is something that the government is rejecting, they will brand that advocacy as fake news. So the trend now is after the passage of cybercrime laws, governments now are trying to pass laws to address the problem of fake news. So the problem with this is that the internet has so many potential for us to address some of the issues related to this. But why prioritize, for example, cybercrime laws over a law that will ensure internet rights, a law that will ensure free speech protection? And also the definition of cybercrime is biased against users. For me, if I will draft a law, I will define slow internet as cybercrime, so that it will benefit all. Anyway, and then of course, as mentioned earlier, the hiring of cyber troops. I think it's a rising phenomenon, the hiring of digital troops, whether acknowledged or not by the state. No? This phenomenon, I think, will worsen, not just at the level of the national government, but also at the local government level. I'm seeing this in the Philippines, where trolls for hire are now being documented ahead of the local elections next year. So, how can we improve our reporting on environment issues? I think one way is to offer more alternatives on development. But right now, there's limited discussion on what model can we do to preserve our resources. I think a few months ago, a few years ago, there was reporting about resource nationalism in Indonesia because of the new taxes imposed on mining. But we have to develop that concept further and give more in-depth reports to the people so that we can have sustainable, we can have more discussion on what type of development. So another thing is more reporting on regional initiatives, regional trends. So for example, or the palm oil issue, plantation issue in Indonesia and Malaysia. I think we can benefit if there are more reports about not just calamities, the impact of storms, but how climate change as an issue is affecting the region as a whole. And we can also have more regional reporting about climate change initiatives from the Pacific Islands, where there are so many initiatives also in that region in addressing climate change. So through these more regional in-depth reports, we can study not just government initiatives, but also the resistance being waged by various peoples in opposing these destructive projects and also in mounting people's initiatives for the protection of the environment. So this is my last slide. Our appeal to stop the attacks and promote free speech and environment protection. So thank you very much and good morning.
Okay, since we will have around half an hour coffee break, I don't think we need that half an hour. So maybe we have like 10 minutes for the Q&A. So if anyone have question, please share your hand.
But just a quick question and also observation. Our last two speakers, right, talking also, I mean, both are related to the palm oil issue. I think one, the issues of the sustainable palm oil is always in our interest because, I mean, I think we know that many people do not believe in it. You know, so but in relation to the media, for example, you know, I think two of you might talk about the same thing, but in a different shade. The indigenous group who are, you know, can perceive that palm oil is a crime in the area might not have the media tools in their hands, right? So, I mean, they cannot react about the issues of palm oil. So, but at the same time, we, the CSO, right, we are having the tools in hand, but I think maybe what we are communicating might be slightly different. I don't know if you can comment on this observation that I have.
Thanks for your comment. Yeah, I think sustainable palm oil is always a very contestable issue because is palm oil sustainable as a crop in the region in that sense? But I mean the main focus of our work with RSPO is really based on changing industry practices, right, of existing plantations, right, and I think that the work that RSPO, I mean, it's not a perfect solution, and we acknowledge that as well. But for us, it's the best solution at the moment because it's a solution where we can have a more balanced and a more neutral approach when it comes to involvement of the industry. Because I think in Singapore that's something that the government places as a very high priority. So something like that for us to go against will be quite difficult as well in that sense. But so having said that, I think RSPO has actually revised their guidelines this year. So they actually just released new guidelines on sustainable palm oil practices and things like that. So some of the things that they have looked at is, of course, having companies to stop producing on peat land that is shown to have that has very high flammability. Like in terms of the peat, if it's a peat area that according to some of the criteria, is an area that fires that the quality of the land there is very flammable, then companies technically have to stop their plantation activities. But of course, that's a very high order, right? How are you going to enforce that on the ground? I think that's a question that we are also working together with them to find out how are they going to enforce such a rule on the ground, because this will essentially wipe out wipe out revenue for businesses. So how are they going to do that? So I think there is some way in terms of that on trying to improve the practices. I think the second question that you mentioned on indigenous populations, right, and what Mong mentioned as well just now, I think that's something that we haven't particularly worked on, because I mean the whole issue on haze is such a huge issue. Scoping out the issue and also the opportunities where we get to work with various communities it's not something that we have a huge expertise in as well, because we're not a development organization, so we're still trying to develop capabilities on that. But I think we have some volunteers who are very passionate about working with indigenous populations, and we actually work with actually there's a filmmaker in Singapore who actually just made a documentary on how palm oil has actually affected indigenous populations, a particular indigenous population in Indonesia, talking about the rights of them and all that. So I think that's a very important conversation that we need to have. And I think sometimes when it comes to environmental protection, sometimes we do ignore the social part of it. So I hope that was a okay response.
In a brief addition to what Benjamin said, I think Philippine-based civil society groups can benefit from the work of PNAs and other groups which have already studied the impact of palm oil plantations. Because right now we're only beginning to see the conversion of lands to palm oil plantations, and local politicians are offering this as less deadly alternative to open pit mining. So maybe right now we should input into the discussion, into the debate about the issue, necessity of having sustainable palm oil plantation. At the same time, more discussion on more models of development. because we addressed that issue in Malaysia, Indonesia, put a moratorium. You shift that problem to the Philippines, and then maybe in some future date, shift it to another country. So there should be more discussion on models of development that could offer better livelihood to our people while preserving our environment.
Thank you. We're talking about, in Southeast Asia here. It seems to me that whether it's a democracy or not probably doesn't matter. Whether it's in Philippines, Duterte, as we pointed out, or Indonesia, even though it's a democracy, where you have authoritarian inputs or stream, into it. So to me, or you look at that around the world, whether it's the US or many parts of Europe now, you call that democracy or authoritarian, I don't know. But anyway, coming back to Southeast Asia, maybe what is perhaps a hopeful sign is that at least in the case of Indonesia and Thailand is going into election next year, right? Well, of course it's still a if, but maybe at least there's an opportunity for citizens to voice its preferences or whatever to the extent possible. And then, the other interesting thing about that is that Thailand is actually chairing ASEAN next year. In 3 weeks' time, Thailand will be chairing already. So maybe that's an opportunity, because from what I hear from the Thai Foreign Ministry is that they still plan to have the civil society interface during Thailand's chairmanship. How that form it will take or whatever, stuff still not quite clear, but at least that's the intention. So civil society should take up that opening when it is offered. So I think maybe I'd like to hear from the civil society and the speakers and so what they think about this kind of opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, if any speaker would like to respond. Okay. We can collect all of the question first, and then maybe have a round of answer later. So maybe.
I have a question for Aswin. Manfred from Heidelberg Foundation. We've talked about palm oil production. I mean, Indonesia is the biggest producer of palm oil globally, but it's not only related to palm oil. There are other issues that have to do with the livelihoods of communities, indigenous communities in countries such as Indonesia. And one of the things is that, the granting of the permissions for the concessions is in very many cases highly dubious. We have, for example, a German company, Heidelberg Cement, investing in an area where indigenous people are being affected and so forth. And I wanted to know from you, Aswin, whether you see litigation as a way to move things into the public sphere, to get people to discuss about it, and how you see the prospect for that in Indonesia, given the quality and receptiveness of your courts, and whether that you see other ways, of helping these communities, maybe through litigation, to get their cases out into the public sphere and discussions about them.
Thank you for question. Yes, history Eurasia has shown that strategic litigation can bring some level of public sphere, particularly when the case is so harsh. Then when people speak outside the court, they will sentence some of criminal charges. But when we talk before the court, of course, as a witness or a lawyers, then our plaintiff, then we have an immunity to say something. So in that sense, I think litigation can bring something on it. And yes, but of course, we have to be careful that the court become the impunity system, because we have so many cases on that. particularly when we are facing a business sector, company, transnational corporation. Then when we sue to the court, then the decision made the company released from all kind charges.
Okay, we can entertain maybe one or two more questions. Chantana.
Chantana from political science. No longer political science, I just retired. I can't play I'm late, sorry I missed the first two presentations. The conference raised the issue of the idea of public sphere as if this would be something that changed the way we do things. Maybe public sphere will call for more responsibilities from different stakeholders, particularly the state. I'm not sure, is this the idea? If that's so, what is the trend? Whether after this hearing something that raising issue of public sphere is also problematic, you can't immediately claim as something given. Right? It's a space that one has to fight for. So it's already a problem. My question is, did you see that while the economic activity is expanding, as if the public sphere should also be expanding because it's have the impact on common people in a broader scale? Whether the space change, whether it's expanding or is it shrinking by raising a problem of impact of economic activities across the region.
Maybe the next one is have a final round.
I have 2 points. The first one to answer Khun Abhishai. I mean, one thing that is very interesting is that maybe one thing for civil society is we are on issue-based politics. Either palm oil, either the issue of the discrimination based on religion or racism. But I think one thing that it might be a kind of commonality is that who create agenda. I mean, at the moment, even though we complain about the issue of shrinking public sphere, but we are still, I mean, in our paradigm of the issue-based politics. So maybe one thing, I think either whether it's racism, democracy, or the way that the state use the natural resources and how the politics or public policy has been taken place. Maybe one thing that the civil society can say is that we should be the one who decide, or at least part of those who can create agenda, that how much space that we want. So in that case, it creates a real contesting. Because at the moment, I still feel that we are still under our own paradigm. The second thing, not only issue-based politics that we are in the paradigm. Back to Ajahn Santana issue, when it goes to economic activity, also whole value added. We are still in the paradigm, whether we are anti-development or not, we are maybe just a prop against the economic activity. So for us, we become the issue like a voice of concern. But I think actually we should change the way of thinking that we are not just those who are not economic value added and voice of concern. But for us, we're talking about the different meaning of sustainability. That the so-called value added of the economy is not sustainable. So in that case, the public sphere can be expanded because at the moment we are still under this kind of the dilemma.
So maybe the final round for any speaker who would like to respond or have a final say. Okay, yes please.
Yes, and I also once have shared commonalities that intersectionality is very important to look at the issue because even for the racism, the religious minority, many of the cases was raised because of natural resources issue, that the company dividing people, buying some groups to pretend or to act on behalf of a particular ethnic or religion. But I also want to point out about the election. Sorry, I forgot about that, sir. And in terms of Indonesia, also in many countries, I think election is just an oligarchy agenda because in our case, we do have a right to vote, but we don't have any rights to deciding who are going to be voted, because only the political party can elect to choose the candidate, only the political party, and it consists of a lot of money to put some to that position. Thank you.
Just a few words. I think I agree that the economic sphere is expanding, but mainly for the benefit of the elite, state-backed groups. But for the rest of the population, it's especially workers and farmers. You have precarious living as the everyday reality. So aware of this inequality, the government is doing everything to reduce the public sphere and silence dissent that would challenge this state of inequality in many societies across the region.
Yes, I'll just quickly respond from from a Singaporean perspective. I think creating more space in the public sphere, or creating more conversations about how you need more space in the public sphere is actually very important. I think the problem we face in Singapore is actually telling people or helping them to understand that they actually have basic human rights, right? And the second thing is basically understanding that they have the right to stand up for what they believe in, whether is it for clean air or whether is it for media freedom, whether is it for freedom of speech, that kind of thing. But I think in Singapore we're in a very unique situation because we live in like I mentioned, we live in a very urban environment. We live in a relatively comfortable and insulated environment. Although we are just next door to Sumatra, not many people actually relate to our position within the Riau archipelago, for example, right? Singapore being a part of that system in the past. I think it's a whole shift of mindsets that is very important to help Singaporeans understand that if we don't stand up for what we believe in, then what is our purpose, as citizens of this region, perhaps not even in the country, but this region. And I think I do agree that we are all very interested in our individual issues. And when we go deep into the issue, we find that there are things that we need to solve, right? And I think that it does put blinkers on in some cases, right? We then lose sight of the bigger picture at times. But then how do you then balance that, having that bigger picture in mind and yet achieving good outcomes in the work that you're doing, which will also perhaps, if you do achieve that good outcome, will also open up that public space or that the space in the public sphere for you, right? And yeah, so I think that's something that I feel fine. And the last thing that I would like to mention is that I think in Singapore there is the government has always been very technical in terms of saying that there is civil society participation in the country. The fact that we have charities and charity organizations in Singapore that are seemingly non-governmental, that are actually funded by the government, right, but are independently incorporated. So we have many of these kinds of non-governmental organizations. I work for one such organization as well. So I do work in both PMAs as well as another organization called the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center. And essentially it is an arm of the Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth. So we have a lot of such organizations around, and the government actually works through many of these organizations, and to show that there is a seemingly, or there is a perception of there is a grassroots movement in the center. But how much of that movement is really authentic? I think that's something that we probably need to question as well.
All right, thank you, Ben. Okay, so I think the time is up, and we have around 10 minutes for the coffee break. So probably around applause to our speaker. I will come back at 11 for the next session. Thank you very much.